Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and it's time. Review day is finally here so I can give you my full, honest feelings regarding Omens of Destruction. Before anything, we do need to talk about a few things, as I do need to throw out some disclaimers. First up, I am what's considered an exalted champion with Creative Assembly. That means it's like the old partner program, just a rather silly title. I get the games a little bit earlier, I get to find out about the products a little bit earlier, and I get to do this early access stuff. Not only that, but yes, I do get a sponsored video every now and then from Creative Assembly, like has happened with this DLC cycle and the previous DLC cycles. However, with all that said, as it's very obvious through many reviews in the past, that does not affect my review in any way, shape or form. If something is bad, it's bad. If it's good, it's good. So, with all that being said, let's talk about this. First thing is, what is Omens of Destruction? Omens of Destruction is the brand new DLC for Total War Warhammer 3, which focuses on the Greenskins, the Ogre Kingdoms, a faction that actually released at the beginning of Warhammer 3 as paid for DLC, and, of course, Khorne. It's following the same format that was introduced in Shadows of Change, where it's Lord versus Lord versus Lord. These DLC packs tend to be quite large, following more or less around the same route as a race pack, but with a few less units and more legendary characters. It's coming after a pretty long drought of around 8 months, but a lot of people have been quite excited about this because the Ogre Kingdoms have desperately needed a rework and a final DLC. Khorne really just wanted some characters in there. And the Greenskins, well, they were perfectly fine. In fact, in this case, they're just getting some additions tacked onto them to basically complete them. At the time of recording this video, there is no official word regarding the price, although it is safe to assume that it will be the same price as the much celebrated previous DLC, Thrones of Decay. So that would be around £19 sterling or around €25, depending on your location. Remember that Steam is location-based, so prices do vary. As it stands, it can be assumed that all DLCs from now on will be around this price, and as long as the content is worth it, it shouldn't really be much of a problem. The reason why I believe the price will remain the same and not go higher is because they'd already increased the prices of the DLC and had massive fallout, especially with massive shit shows all across the board through various different titles. They wouldn't want a repeat of that, they can't afford another repeat of that, and they aren't that stupid. Well, one would hope. Alright, let's start off with the content, and let's start off with Khorne. So, Khorne is a faction which generally felt okay, and I mean in regards to before Omens of Destruction. Sure, there were some little problems here and there, but nothing that couldn't be fixed through a patch or two. They were not really lacking on content, but they have received a fair amount. The first thing that we're getting is Skulltaker, a brand new legendary lord, which focuses around killing, and that's the main thing. Which makes sense considering what Skulltaker is. He's a duelist and he's going around trying to kill the best fighters around the Warhammer fantasy world. And that's what his unique campaign is about. Going and finding the fighters, killing them, taking their essence, and making yourself stronger and stronger throughout it. It's rather simple, but it's perfect for Khorne. There are really no complaints with regards to it. You're not looking for complexity when you're playing Khorne, you're looking for just a good time playing Total War. As you guys are aware that this DLC is a bundle, it's also able to be purchased in separate parts. You can just buy the Khorne stuff, you can buy the Ogre stuff, you can buy them both and just completely forget the Greenskin stuff. So for this, we're going to be separating all the content sections into sections as they can be reviewed individually, and I can then say, is Khorne worth it after I discuss Khorne, for example. It just makes it a little bit easier, because I know some people are just looking towards one specific legendary lord, or one part of the DLCs. Khorne received not one but two legendary heroes, the first one being Sylar Anfingrim, who is a fan favourite throughout the whole of Warhammer Fantasy, Blood Bowl 2. It was very obvious that Games Workshop favoured him as a character because he had a lot of model updates over the years. His final design is what made it into Total War Warhammer through Creative Assembly, and there's no complaints once again. Awesome legendary hero, big damage, very fun to use. Everyone likes the whole monkey chaos spawn. Anyone who knows Warhammer Fantasy lore pretty much knows Sylar, so it's always something exciting when you get a big name from the lore established in a 40-year setting as a playable character that you can just destroy stuff with. The next legendary hero is Skullbloodwrath, one of the first characters that we're seeing from the End Times IP coming into Total War Warhammer. He's the leader of the Scaramore tribe. He is a very powerful fighter. Like, I'm not kidding here, we did battle testing live and he basically killed Archaon the Everchosen in like 15 seconds. The character is very, very cool. And not only that, but all the other end time stuff attached to him comes with him. The issue is he is a legendary hero. You see, in the lore, Scar Bloodwrath is a tribal leader. He leads the Scaramore. In fact, you end up with a lot of the Scaramore troops. We'll be talking about those units a little bit later on, but yeah, you know, the Wrathmongers, Skull Reapers, Blood Speakers, those are all followers of Scar Bloodwrath, and it's a bit disappointing that a leader is being pushed into a hero's role. I know a lot of people don't care about this, but others do, and the fact is that Sylar even joins the Scaramore during the end times. It's very clear that this game is now leaning towards the end time story. One of the two legendary heroes was implemented because we lack a generic hero choice. Khorne doesn't really have that many. We already have the Exalted Hero and we have the Cultist. And I get why they did that, but I still think that Scar should have been a Lord. In fact, they could have introduced him as a Lord to further generate hype regarding the DLC. It wouldn't be expected all the time, it would just be, hey, since we're getting to 100, we're also deciding to do another one for free. Because we've got 100 Lords now. Arbal is the 100th legendary lord. Something like that would have been great to celebrate. You know, it's a milestone. They have taken loads and loads of people's money over the years, but apparently that's just not going to happen. Both of those characters, however, have a benefit. They can be used by other factions. Scar and Sylar can be used by the Warriors of Chaos, and Norsca has access to Sylar, which makes Norsca a little bit less crap. I mean, they're still awful, but yeah, a little bit better. The Blood Speakers are your generic Lord option, and yeah, they were created from a half a sentence of lore. Obviously, they had to go to Games Workshop, and Games Workshop had to provide direction, but it's really interesting to see how really deep into the lore they can create stuff from. It's a support character, it's kind of like a warrior priest, it's pretty cheap, you can reduce the upkeep on your Scaramore troops quite drastically, which will favor armies like that. They work really well not only for the Khorne faction, but also for Valkyria the Bloody too. My only literal complaint about this is they don't have Juggernauts. I would love for more God-touched mounts being used. These guys and the cultists should really be able to use them. That's just my opinion. I know some people think otherwise, but yeah. Other than that, it's a really great Lord option, and it's something that a lot of people wanted. They wanted something like a Bloodfather, which would be kind of similar, but this is obviously focused more on the Scaramore route rather than the Cultist route, but it's perfect for what it is. I really like running them in battle, and I think that they're going to be a staple every time I play with Khorne. Okay, units-wise, there's a bunch of new units. We've got the Blood Beasts, which are kind of like a Chaos Spawn, but also not. A redesign on a creature introduced a long time ago. Nothing really there, other than the fact that they share too much of the animation and rig of Sylar, because, I mean, yeah, that was kind of expected. When you do Monkey Chaos Spawn and then Monkey Chaos Spawn character, they're going to be very similar. Still a very good Shock Trooper, so I don't think anyone's going to have a problem with that, though. Slaughter Brute, Big Beastie. Nothing again to complain about that, because it's what it does. It's a good monster killer, it's a big centerpiece. Everyone loves a centerpiece unit, especially if it actually does what it's supposed to do. The great thing about Khorne, and I've seen people complain about it, it's like, oh, it's simple. But no, simple is what makes it so good. You don't have to overthink with Khorne. It's just get your army, get the big monsters, get the warriors, throw them into combat, and that's what this does too. Okay, Khorne Gauze is where things get a bit strange. It's nice to have halberd infantry, even though the old models were great weapons. I personally would have preferred additional hand weapons, and I'm honestly kind of surprised that we don't have access to two different variants. While additional hand weapons weren't part of the tabletop models, neither were the halberds, so it would have been nice. We know that variants don't cost that much to make, which is going to be quite surprising when we talk about the greenskins. It would have been nice just to have a 6th unit. Sure, it would have been a bit of an imbalance, but the animations for the Gauze with additional hand weapons are there, so it's literally just a palette swap and that's it. Maybe Games Workshop said no, because Creative Assembly do look forward to trying to do as much as they can, but it would have been very, very cool because it would have benefited the Beastmen too. Remember that a lot of these units for Chaos DLC generally benefit that of other races and factions too. Now, for the Beastmen, they're great, and for the Warriors of Chaos, they're great. There are no complaints regarding this unit. In general, Khorne is going to receive a lot of favor. Skull Reapers is where things get a little bit weird, though. One of the two End Times units that we have as generic units right now for Khorne is the Skull Reaper. Additional hand weapons, very good at doing melee, but they've been hearkened to that of Chaos Warriors. They struggle versus Chosen, when in reality they should be a little bit better than Chosen. This is because they are a unit that has incredible stats on the tabletop. I'm just not going to lie about that. They did have a variant that had a two-handed weapon on the tabletop, but it never actually had any rules, which is just Games Workshop's usual forte. They're very good. I like them. They're very good at skirmishing. They're very good at dishing out damage. The issue is that they kind of fall in between Chaos Warriors and Chosen I feel like they should be at least equal to Chosen, or they should be a bit higher. Wrathmongers are very similar with double flails. I know, a lot of melee, but that's how it's going to be for Khorne for the future. I doubt that we're going to get extra Khorne DLC. Now, these guys, they perform closer to that of Chosen. Sometimes they can outperform Chosen depending on the upgrades that you've got on them. I like them. It's nice to see Demonkin there. I would prefer if they were just a little bit beefier. It's when you start looking to these Demonkin where they are almost to the path of ascending, they're supposed to be stronger than Chosen. Now, they're still fairly good at what they do, and I've seen them cause havoc on the battlefield. We've used them on streams, and they are quite fun. But again, I don't know. See, this is where it go back to Scar. Had Scar been a Lord, he could have had faction effects, which could have actually boosted up the Scaramore, and they would have been better with him than they would be with other factions, which would make sense. So would I recommend the Khorne content by itself with everything I've spoken about? The Khorne content by itself, I'd highly recommend it. I think it's a pretty decent DLC. Sure, I've got some gripes with it, but I think that I'm going to be in the majority there. Still, never going to let that Scar thing go down. The mounts thing isn't really that important, and really, there's always a chance at a free LC unit update in a 0.1 or 0.2 patch when it comes to potential Khorne Gores with additional hand weapons. This DLC, the Chaos side, is always going to be more valuable than the Ogres or even the Greenskins, because Chaos DLC helps out various different other factions too. Now you've got Khorne Gores with your Beastmen. You don't have the Khornators though, however, but this does mean that you have a really good anti-large unit with the Beastmen now, which the Beastmen have been kind of lacking as time has gone on and more big monsters are being added into loads of different locations. The Warriors of Chaos stuff, I'm a bit kind of disappointed. Archaon doesn't have access to the Scaramore troops just yet, which, I mean, I guess they're waiting for an End Times DLC. When it comes to Valkyria, I don't like the idea of the Skull Reapers and the Wrathmongers being harder to recruit, because at the end of the day, it's silly on how it's handled with the Warriors of Chaos. Wrathmongers and Skull Reapers should be unit upgrades. This is something that I really do stand firmly on. The other stuff being gifts of Khorne, I don't like either, but I'd rather just get the unit upgrades than anything else. Considering that Nurgle got new unit upgrades with the Rot Knights, I feel like Khorne should be able to get that too. Still, I would say that yes, this DLC is still worth it, even for the Warriors of Chaos side. If you're just looking to add more to the Warriors of Chaos because you just really like Valkyria, for example, this works out for you. These packs by themselves are usually, what, £7, £8, something like that. You're getting a Legendary Lord, you're getting 2 Legendary Heroes, you're getting a very unique new Lord option for Khorne, something that was never there on the tabletop unless you go really far back. And you're getting 5 rather cool units. You're going way back with the Khorne Gores. You're a big Khorne fan. You've got the bragging rights of getting the first 2 proper End Times units, technically free with the Blood Speaker, and then something redesigned but brought to life with the Blood Beast, alongside with a big beastie. I don't generally rate stuff, but I would give this like a 7 out of 10 when it's just the Khorne stuff. I think Khorne stuff is pretty good. Could be a little bit better, but definitely worth the money if you like playing as Khorne, either as the Monogods or just the Warriors of Chaos, or both, really. It is important to note that there has been a fairly big rework for Khorne too, and I'm talking about this after giving it its value because this is the state of the game now and the rework is going to be free regardless, but has fallen in the same development cycle as the DLC. The rework has helped Khorne get a little bit better. Sure, Khorne didn't really need something, as functionally they were kind of fine, but they've made it easier for newer players to kind of get used to the setting, kind of get used to Khorne, as it was a little bit different to your average Total War playthrough. It's still functionally the same, you're still going to be in the red a lot, because armies are expensive. Grave Assembly said that they made the prices cheaper for the units. I really don't see it, to be honest, but yeah. If the rework wouldn't have come into effect, I would have still said that the Khorne stuff was worth it. Like 100%. Still a 7 out of 10, but still, yes, it's worth it. And I think that's a good thing, because it shows that Khorne did get a lot of love. I think Khorne was one of the few factions at the launch of Warhammer 3 which I considered playable. One gripe that I do have is Skarbrand didn't really get anything, and it's pretty weird. There was a lot of love put into a lot of characters. Skarbrand should have gotten something unique for him, maybe something along the lines as the Rampage mechanic that Taurox has, but in a different styling. Building up the bar by donating skulls, for example. it's a bit weird that he didn't get anything as Skull Taker and Arbal have their own thing. I know Creative Assembly have said in the past, well, you know, the base game lords don't need a mechanic. Franz has a mechanic now, so that went at the table a while ago. Skarbrand is a big name and he did deserve something. Alright, it's going to be the Ogres next, and that is going to be Gorg Maneater. Yes, I am aware that that's not his name, but I rather this video not get demonetized. This is my job after all, and unfortunately YouTube can't tell the difference between a name and a slur. So yeah, let's jump in. Gorg Maneater is a mercenary, the original dog of war, a rather famous character in Warhammer Fantasy, so understandably a lot of people were super hyped up to see him. In campaign, the character is able to just live as a mercenary. You don't have to actually take over settlements. You can just keep going from location to location and just do contracts. You can actually finish the campaign like that, providing you with the first full mercenary campaign for Total War Warhammer. It's very clear here that Creative Assembly had learned from the mistakes made with creating the Changeling and have refined that, so while it might start the same way each and every time as you still find yourself within the Empire as your start position, you can get contracts to send you to Cathay, to Lustria, to the Darklands, everywhere, and that allows for replayability in a pretty near endless state. Remember that Total War drastically changes every time you fire up a campaign. The legendary hero is Bragg the Gutsman, a character which is known for, well, being a murderous psychopath, and I think that fits really well. Anti-large, able to do a lot of damage, really loving smile there, and to be honest, there's not much to talk about because what he does in the battlefield, he does incredibly well. And that's a good thing. It's nice to have a legendary hero that just performs very well. My only real complaint here is that the way that you get him, unlike any other legendary hero, is by assassinating or wounding another character. It's very RNG focused, and unless you have characters tailored for that, it could lead to taking a lot of time to pick him up. I'm not sure why this character has that, whereas every other character it's literally build this, do that, do a quest battle. Nothing with an RNG focus, which is kind of frustrating. Paymasters are your brand new Lord option, which is, funnily enough, just taking a Paymaster Maneater, one of those models from back in the day, and turning it into a Lord. It's a support character, which means that you're going to get some buffs there, you're going to be able to drastically reduce the upkeep of your troopers. I mean, it adds a different option. In the tabletop, you only really had Tyrants and Slaughtermasters, so it's nice to have something different. No mounts though, and I think that's a big issue there, but that's an issue with all the ogres at the moment, barring just the hunters. I still think that they're fairly decent and they're cheaper too, so you can run them a lot more with different armies. I think a lot of people are going to see them as the core character choice when you're forming new armies now. Bruisers, there's not a lot to talk about. It's literally just your tyrant, but as a hero style, and it's got a Iron Fist instead, so it's shielded, but it's there to protect your characters, but it can do fairly good damage. I really don't think anyone needs more explanation. It's a melee hero, and I think everyone wanted that for the ogres. Creative Assembly were clearly having trouble trying to find a unit to make the roster feel complete, so they introduced Blood Vultures, something that was actually more of a unit upgrade than anything else. Sure, they showed up a little bit more in the RPG mechanics and so on, but yeah. I mean, it ended up being better than expected. I might have sounded a little bit negative there, but they really performed quite well. It's a flying unit, it gives you something fast to go attack enemy war machines. They'll also get stronger as entities start to die around them. They end up being a decent unit. Gorg's Maneaters are literally just additional hand weapons on Maneaters, a little bit heavy armor. They're not too bad, they look kind of goofy looking, but then again it's an ogre. They perform pretty decently with your big boy. Overall, Maneater units are always going to be quite popular. I still can't kind of get used to them being a unit when they used to be more like hero squads, but the implementation of having different variety there does give you something to play around with, and I think that's always a good thing. The Ogre roster was always incredibly limited. You'd be losing out on a lot of units if they ended up just being hero squads. Piggyback Riders were a unit that I wasn't keen on originally, and honestly, it's grown on me, like tremendously so. Ogres lacked anti-large in most cases, and especially a cheap, effective anti-large that performs as well as it does. I was genuinely surprised as how good it actually was as a unit. Sure, it's not going to be wow-worthy, but surprisingly, it is incredibly useful. Yetis are finally in as a shock trooper, very similar to that of the Gorges, that you'll be using them to get around through enemy lines, through the side, through the back, and the added benefit here is that they can slow the enemies down. Think of them like trolls, but with additional hand weapons and a lot more uses. This now means that you've got pretty much all the main troops from the tabletop with regards to skirmishing and specialized warfare. Gorges, Saber-tusks, and Yetis. And finally the Thundertusk, your centerpiece monster, which will very likely get nerfed shortly after the release of the DLC. It's incredibly powerful, it's a monster that everyone wanted. Some people are complaining that it's a reskin of the Stonehorn. I mean, it's from the same tabletop kit, so what do you expect? But what makes it very, very good is the fact that it slows down enemy. It's an artillery piece also, so you've got a moving, monstrous artillery piece. It's not going to do as much damage from range as a Iron Blaster, but it's going to slow down the enemy and hit them quite hard. And what the benefit is, it's going to be able to go into melee and rip apart enemies without an issue. This is a fantastic unit, and it's one that I've been waiting for a long, long time. So we've talked about all the content for the Ogre Kingdoms. Now, rating. I'd give them a 7.5 out of 10. Something which I know might surprise some people, but the Ogres themselves are in a pretty good spot now. We'll talk about the rework in just a small while, but with the inclusion of all these units, functionally the Ogre Kingdoms are done. I don't expect any more DLCs for them, maybe a free character every now and then, but they are fully complete, and all the big holes that were missing, like the Yetis and the Thundertusks, which without them the Ogres were always going to be incomplete. Now it's done. Gorg himself is an incredibly fun campaign. The fact that you can just play as a full mercenary, that's just awesome. It's really, really fun, and you can tailor it with building up an empire at the same time, getting ridiculous amounts of cash. Everything feels really good. It's definitely the most powerful campaign compared to Greasus and Scrog. All the units have some function. Yes, even the reskinned Gorgs Man-Eaters are very, very good. The campaign is great. The legendary hero is really, really good. I have no complaints. It's surprising because it's taken 2.5 years to actually get the Ogres into a very good spot. Now, to get the full Ogre experience, you're going to have both DLCs. The good thing is that the Ogre Kingdom base DLC isn't that expensive, so they'll actually tie up quite nicely. I think if you get both together, it more or less equates to that of a normal race pack, maybe a little bit less. So, yeah, I'd say it's worth it. To finish up the Ogre experience, I think it's probably the best way possible. Now this race is done, and we can look towards the future for hopefully other races to be as complete too. I do want to stress, however, that if it wasn't for the Ogre rework, this would not get a 7.5. This would still get a 2. A 2 out of 10 if it was still the same old Ogre experience. There are some things I would change. The camps themselves aren't really movable, and I think that's what knocked off half a point, or else I would have given it an 8. Creative Assembly have this really bad habit of talking on their blogs about how this moves or this does that, and it does move, but not in the way that people expect it to. People were expecting moving it like you would a Black Ark, but on land. Instead, you disband it and build it somewhere else. It's not a bad system, but you have to be clear about these matters. That's not really moving, that's disbanding and re-recruiting. Everything else works fine now. The new meat system is just much, much better. You can actually play with your armies and not feel like you're always going to be in the red. The Offerings to the Great Moor is such a better UI and works a lot better. The new tech tree, it just feels very, very good. This is definitely how it should have been at launch, but then again, you know, the disaster that was Warhammer 3's original launch was something that will boggle the mind for many Total War games as the years go by. If I can be completely honest with you, I hate the fact that we have to look towards reworks like this to actually make a race that should have been playable from the beginning, playable now. I will still praise the rework. It's clear that they've had a change of direction when it comes to working. Creative Assembly are buckling down and looking towards stuff that is broken and going, okay, we have to fix this now. So I'm not going to say it's 2 years too late. I'm going to say it's about time. I'm happy about it. And we expect that going forward, we will continue to get this quality when it comes to reworks. Believe it or not, I would put it on par with the Dwarf rework plus the 0.1 rework that attached the Deeps mechanic. While it's not necessarily as big as the Dwarf rework, what it did do very well is make them play as they should. When you think about ogres in the lore, you think about stuff like this. Greasus and Skrarg also getting their own unique mechanics, well, that was an extra bonus that really makes it viable to go back and go, I don't own the Ogre Kingdoms DLC, the base one, I might as well pick it up now. We definitely need more of this. More characters from Warhammer 1, Warhammer 2, and including Warhammer 3 need a few reworks to bring them up to par from what is expected from a AAA company. It's very obvious that the fanbase is willing to pay Creative Assembly to do these DLCs for a third of the price of the base game, essentially. But it has to be worth it. It has to be of a higher quality. No more Shadows of Change, more Thrones of Decay. Alright, we're going into the Greenskin content now, and Gorbad Ironclaw is coming in as a really good representation of his lore. His campaign is focused around tactics, being smart. It's something that you don't see a lot with the Greenskins, but he did it very well, almost basically destroying Altdorf too. It's a really interesting thing to see a completely different style of gameplay. This is a faction which, with this character, you're not incentivized to do doom stacks, but rather mix and match with various different types of armies on the field all over the place. Gorbad is so drastically different to the other Greenskins that I think a lot of people are going to enjoy playing him. Snagler Grobspit is the legendary hero. He is really strong because you can boost up the army to be specialized around spiders, Arachnaroks, spider hatchlings, and of course spider riders, with a 40% reduction to spider riders, which is wild. Like, that's really good in terms of upkeep. They're not the best units, but once you start boosting them up and you use his unique skill line, they're really insane. The thing here is, and I know people are tired of me saying this, he should have been a lord. They should have had Gatilla as a hero and had him as a lord in another DLC or a character pack, if Creative Assembly ever decides to do those, because it would have been nice to get representation from all the subgroups of Greenskins, this being the Forest Goblins. Even though we're not likely to see him as a character, he plays extremely well, and yeah, he's gonna tailor up your armies to be really weird. It's definitely strange seeing the spiders performing very well, but here we are. Savage Orc Great Shamans are your lord choice. Now don't get confused here, the roster for the Greenskins is going to be very mismatched, and that's the idea, which fits with Gorbad very well. Savage Orc Great Shamans finally give you a lord option with the lore of the Big War. Again, Savage Orcs, one of my favorites, so I'm going to be very biased here. It works very well for a Wurzag campaign, and in general, just Savage Orcs have that physical resistance, which makes them very strong. You can boost up a lot of troops with that too, as they have specialized skill points for that. The only thing that sucks here is we're likely not going to see another Greenskin DLC, and we're missing out on so many other Lord and Hero choices. Speaking of which, Night Goblin big bosses have been added in, and they've been retooled from what they used to be in the tabletop. Rather than just being the war boss but smaller, they are a support character there for squigs. I like the idea of that. You're going to be using a lot of squigs if you like playing Scarsnake, for example. It's nice to have some support characters. I can't imagine it was easy to decide what to do with certain generic lords and heroes, especially when the Greenskins has one melee hero for 5 different subcultures, you know what I mean? There's so many of the same, just slightly different stats. Colossal Squig's pretty much what's expected. It's a squig, just giant, it does a lot of damage, it rolls onto the enemy, it's absolutely adorable. Yeah, we can't really talk too much about it. You know how a squig works, you've used them in big groups before, now it's just one very large one. Mangler Squigs are a testament to Creative Assembly's ability to code, let's be honest, because these things must have not been easy to animate or create in any way, shape, or form. I didn't know how they were going to do them personally. I always wanted Mangler Squigs. They're here. The fact that they explode when they die is absolutely amazing, which means if they die in combat, you're still doing damage after that. I adore them. I really like most of the Greenskin stuff, and this one is just a shining unit for that. Goblin Bolt Throwers. Okay, not too interesting, let's be very clear there, but a lot of people did want it, and I can see why. You know, it's an iconic old school mini, you know, that heavy metal bolt thrower that you'd have, and for some reason have extra crew for. It gives you some long range, it gives you some anti-large, it gives you some armor piercing. I mean, it does what it's supposed to, and that's a great thing. And it is a unique unit, at least. Black Orcs with shields. I really like them, and this is the problem. I'm very conflicted here. Black Orcs with shield are awesome. The fact that they can hold down the line because they've got that special ability makes them really useful in combat. The issue is, it's a unit variant. And I thought we were done with unit variants, and they were going to be free. I get it, there has to be some work done. There has been some new stuff implemented for them with regards to animations and art and all that. But it just feels a bit out of place. Again, I like them, but you get what I mean here, right? It's just odd. This should have been a free unit. And I think the same thing goes for the Web Flinger, the Arachnarok Spider. It's always good to have more Arachnaroks, but the fact that an upgrade unit, it's just literally a rock lobber, it's still very useful in combat, and you will get use out of it. But unit variants should have been free stuff, right? It's just odd to see this happen again with the greenskins, at least, when there's so many other things that we're kind of missing. So is the Greenskin DLC worth it? Well, this is the thing. With Gorbad alone, I would give it a 7 out of 10. It was such an enjoyable campaign. It really brings a new perspective for the greenskins, and the grand majority of the additions, such as the Savage Oak Great Shaman, the Night Goblin Big Boss, the Mangler Squigs, the Colossal Squig, and even the Bolt Thrower, they're very good additions. It kind of gets held down a little bit because of the Black Orcs and the Arachnarok Spider. That's just my opinion, though. Those are kind of free units. I wouldn't mind like a Scraps DLC where they just did units for different factions. That would be justifiable, but it just felt a little bit odd here. We're missing stuff like the Big Stabber, or maybe even the Squig Gobber, you know, artillery squigs. That would have been kind of cool, especially since we were getting that many squigs here. And I think that's probably why they decided not to do it. So I will give it a 7, purely because Gorbad and the grand majority of the content is pretty damn good. But if there would have been a Squig Goblin and a Big Stabber, this could have elevated it to an 8, 8.5, I think. It's something that I really feel strongly about. Less reskins. Like, I get some units, like for example, the Yetis kind of use a lot of the same stuff as the Trolls, but they're very similar in terms of like what those monsters are. So it's expected. But some unique stuff could have come into play to really just go full ham, and I think that's what they were trying to do with this DLC, which is obvious. It's pretty damn good. It's not as good as, say, for example, Thrones of Decay, but we're going to compare them in just a little bit. There hasn't been a lot in terms of rework. Sure, they kind of fixed up the war mechanic a little bit, and the scrap mechanic is a very nice change, actually. Skarsnik got updated very slightly, Wurzag also, but no unique mechanics for them, or Grimgor, or Azag. It would have been nice to see something there, because it's very obvious that they could do something a bit more. Wurzag I can justify in a sense, because all these unique landmarks and stuff kind of gives him a unique campaign, and he already kind of had a unique one with focusing on the Savage Orcs, even more so now with the skill updates and the Savage Orc Great Shaman. But there needs to be something done about Skarsnik at some point, 8 Peaks patch or something. Fix him, Belagar, and Queek. We've actually, funny enough, said that during the Thrones of Decay review. Grimgor needs something, Azag needs something. They all need to get something to bring them back on par with everyone else. This is something that's going to be a slow process, and it might happen in 0.1 patches, but it would have been lovely to get it here. In Thrones of Decay, for example, and this is always going to be the DLC that I'm going to look back to from now on, we had reworks for the dwarfs, reworks for Nurgle, an added mechanical boost to Kugath, and then some reworks for the Empire Lords, so everyone is kind of done now. It's just a shame and a missed opportunity here, and there's a lot of questions regarding that. In terms of comparison, yeah, I mean, Thrones of Decay was 9 for Nurgle, an 8.5 for the dwarfs, but then became a 9 after the rework for the rework of the rework. Yeah, I know it sounds weird. Having in the deeps really put in the actual cherry on top for the dwarfs. And then a 8.5 for the Empire. I think the Empire would have likely gotten a 9 had the repeater drama not happened, because we got to play around with them originally, and they were really, really good. And they had to be taken away. That seems to be a Games Workshop issue, but what really confuses me here is why those units were done, animated and everything, and then taken away. It almost feels like Creative Assembly went under assumption for this, rather than actually having it confirmed by Games Workshop. It's still a very good DLC, and there's a lot to talk about there, and then when you compare it to Omens of Destruction, it's not that bad. 7 for Khorne, 7.5 for the Ogres, and finally 7 for the Greenskins. I would have probably gone higher for all of them had a few things come into effect, and we have to talk about that. It's going to be a very long review, so I really do hope that you guys have got some snacks. You might look at 7s and think that they're low. I don't think that. I don't really give 10 out of 10s and 9s lightly. Thrones got very high praise because when you compare it to the previous DLC, it's like looking at copper compared to platinum, right? So if you put them in a tier list, I would probably put Omens of Destruction in A tier, maybe closer to B, A minus in a sense. It's still very, very good. And that's the thing. I'm very, very critical when it comes to these types of situations because I want the best possible product. And it's a very good product as it stands. I've said this in the Thrones of Decay review. It was going to be very, very tough for Creative Assembly to top Thrones of Decay. Unless it's a race pack or unless it's something absolutely massive, it wasn't going to top something like that. Another reason about the scoring is we need to look towards some other matters. So let's just jump right in. Realms of Chaos is dead, and I know a lot of people are quite excited about that. But I have a question here. With the work that would have gone into Realms of Chaos, where did that go? None of the characters need to have any work done with regards to the mechanics and being placed into a new map with various changes, triggers for different campaigns, or all the different, like, quest battles and stuff like that, right? Well, since that work stress was relieved, you would have expected some sort of extra push to make the patch maybe a little bit bigger, because it's fairly large, but it's not as big as 5.0 was. It doesn't have to be as big, but it had to be close enough, and it just feels a little bit smaller here. Now, obviously, yes, we do have to take into account that there were layoffs that were announced just before the release of Thrones of Decay, which fucked Creative Assembly over. Thank you, Sega. Always the most intelligent company in the world, aren't you? So they were running on a smaller ship. That stuff I can understand, but there has been no real communication as to why this might have taken a little longer. I imagine that they can't say anything because Sega would then slap them down and you really can't really bitch about your parents' company, but it's something that I'm always kind of conscious about. How many problems are we seeing here that are only Creative Assembly, and how many problems are we seeing here that are led by Sega? The weird thing is we've been getting some very large patches with the 0.1, 0.2 stuff. It's very, very cool to see, but I'm also wondering if those 0.1s, 0.2, and sometimes 0.3 patches are taking away from the main DLC patches, or is it that they're just not getting enough support internally and they're just being hurt themselves? The Warhammer team is clearly the only reason the lights are still on for Creative Assembly, so I'm a little bit concerned as to why everything feels a little bit smaller. CA Sofia are now supporting Warhammer. This is something that was pretty much rumored for a long, long time now, and I've been hearing a lot of rumors that I'm not going to discuss in a review video, but we'll talk about later down the line. I like CA Sofia as a team. They were shafted with 2 games that pretty much nobody wanted, let's be honest there, but they're very talented. They're very, very talented, and it shows. We know that they were working on the Khorne stuff. The Khorne stuff is really, really cool. And that's nothing against CA Horsham. It's more of a case that we're getting some fresh eyes, and I think that's really good to see. Fresh eyes means more possibilities. One thing that I really do like about CA Sofia is that they do like to innovate with certain things. They've done that a lot with Troy, and it's stuff that has bled into Warhammer over time. If it's the case that we're going to end up with 2 different studios, Horsham and Sofia, working on Warhammer DLCs, it could potentially end up in a really good spot. We know that we've got amazing devs with CA Horsham, right? Say as much as you want, but there's some very good talent there. I won't name any of them because they don't like being named and stuff, but there's a lot of talent there. It shows with the animation, it shows with some of the mechanics, it shows with the character art, it shows that there's a lot of passionate developers at CA Horsham. Long may they stay in Warhammer, but it's also a good thing that we're going to likely get CA Sofia possibly working on more DLCs. In a perfect world, we'd have one team working on one DLC and the other one on another one, because DLCs then could come a little faster. More on that a little bit later. And going back to the whole patch situation, I can imagine that maybe the patch is smaller because they had to onboard Sofia. That's something that we can always take into account. At the end of the day, they'll need to be trained because Warhammer is a different IP. It's not a random historical place. This is them having to deal with one of the most anal companies in the world, right? God bless Games Workshop. They're very protective over their stuff, sometimes in a detrimental sense, but it makes sure that their IP stays fully theirs. CA Sofia would have had to be taught how to work with Games Workshop, how to communicate with them. That's very, very important, and that stuff can slow down a process. The next thing, and this is something that kind of got me the wrong way, there's no narrative. I don't know what you're saying. Well, Thrones of Decay didn't have a narrative, and I would argue against that. You kind of played through the narrative in Thrones of Decay. With Elspeth, you were protecting the Empire to protect yourself. With Tamokon, you were building up your unholy warband so you could then go destroy the Empire. With Malachi, you were going on a bit of a questing system. None of the other lords, barring Skulltaker, has that kind of narrative. Skulltaker, it's literally hunt down characters, hunt down characters. Golg is be a mercenary, but like it just plops you in there, no context. Gorbad is just cause a war, and that's pretty much it, right? Like, do your tactics, and that's pretty much it. It feels a bit odd. I would have gone with Golg having like mercenary mechanics, but like a little bit of flavor text popping in more about like trying to be the best dog of war. Just a little bit more narrative in the mechanic, a little bit of flavor text popping up a little bit more. That stuff is invaluable. And then with Gorbad, a little bit more flavor text about, you know, wanting to destroy the Empire. That's something that he did in the lore, like, before. Because he's actually dead in the lore at this point, you know? But Total War has its own timeline thing. A little bit of flavor text goes a long way to get people immersed into those characters, I think. Or just the feeling. Now, the intro stuff is a great narrative point of view of who those characters are. But I feel like we missed out on a potential Thrones of Decay-like campaign where just felt so natural. And I know full well, before you start typing angry comments down there, it's not a big thing. It's not. The sandbox has to be there because it's Total War and that's what we've all wanted. But a little bit, just a tiny little bit of narrative goes a long way. My big question is, what is going on with these DLCs taking 8 months? I know, yes, layoffs, onboarding, training, and so on, but it doesn't feel like a DLC like this should have taken 8 months. It's really strange where DLCs are getting longer and longer in terms of production, and sometimes the quality hits very, very well. Thrones of Decay was worth the wait, and I would even say Omens of Destruction was worth the wait too, albeit a smaller wait. There's something odd going at the background of Creative Assembly, and this hasn't been a thing since layoffs. This has been a thing since just Warhammer 3 in general. It leads me to think certain things. One thing I really want to briefly mention, as you've been seeing on screen, there's a new area in Grand Cafe, which, you know, the cafe in Interlands, it borders Koresh. Kind of cool. Very, very cool. No context about it. And it makes me think that maybe perhaps some leaks that happened in the past might have actually been true after all, and they did a hard pivot. That's the only way that I could imagine that this would have taken 8 months. It's very well known, by the way, that whilst one team is working on finalizing DLC, like, for example, say Thrones of Decay, there would have already been other people on the next DLC. This stuff takes time, especially when you have to get stuff approved by Games Workshop, which I've heard can be a bit of a hassle from developers, not from CA, but from other companies. Creative Assembly's momentum is slowing down, and that does worry me, because there's a lot of characters we haven't seen in game yet, Nagash, Fanquil, and so on. The fact that we're getting DLCs every 8 months at the moment is not a good thing. They should hurry up, especially as it's the only thing making them any goddamn money. The next DLC is likely going to feature Slaanesh, maybe High Elves and Dark Elves. It would be kind of nice. I expect it to be more or less the same quality as between Omens of Destruction and Thrones of Decay, and if that's the case, that's going to be quite good. So it should be a big hitter. There's a lot of stuff that's expected. If all the chatter between High Elves, Dark Elves, and Slaanesh is real, I could see them changing out a race, maybe even to... Slaanesh has to be next, though. They've done the Chaos factions one by one, and then afterwards we could expect the Dogs of War, I'm imagining. But we're in a pretty good spot. I think that if it's between that line, yes, that's fine. If it's lower than Omens of Destruction, then there'll be problems. I would say that Thrones of Decay and Omens of Destruction have set the standard of the DLCs that we're going to start seeing from now on. That's fairly good. I'm happy with that idea, but it's clear that they need to up the speed, like I said before. I know this might not be relevant to a current review, but I think it's relevant to the whole fan base who has been waiting for a long, long time through drip feeding information. I have liked the blogs, and I think that those developer chats, the videos, is really cool. The fact that they're introducing a lot of devs and showcasing that a lot of people are passionate about the project, but we need to start seeing more product too. Right, with all that being said, should you buy this DLC? Okay, so we have to talk about it with that sense of this is a bundle. So you can either buy it as a group, or you can buy it as separate pieces. All of the DLCs themselves are quite decent. Yes, there are certain things that I'm not keen on, like reskinned units, but the faction and the campaign itself is very, very fun and unique. And I think a lot of people look towards the campaign and the actual legendary characters before anything else. The great thing is that you can easily ignore the stuff that you're not too keen on, but I do think that overall this is a pretty good DLC in that regard. Like I said, it's not going to be a S tier worthy, but it lands on the A- style. That's still very high ranking for me. I'm very critical when it comes to Creative Assembly. I think that this is a very good product. I think that this is going to be a DLC that's going to be quite popular with the Chaos fans, definitely with the Greenskin fans if they want something new, and the Ogre fans are finally going to actually have a campaign that's playable for them. Well, 3 campaigns now thanks to 6.0. 6.0 carried a lot here. I think 6.0 was a big push to make this DLC more profitable. Mistakes have definitely been learned from Shadows of Change. Yes, that was already obvious with Thrones of Decay, but we needed to see it twice to make sure that it was actually learned. It's very, very possible for a company to kind of do something really good straight after a shit show and then go straight back to shit shows. Look at Blizzard, for example. They do that fairly often. They're doing better now, but you know, it's always ups and downs with them. We are now up and up. Hopefully this keeps on continuing. Skulltaker is very, very fun. Gorbad is very, very fun. Golg is very, very fun. Very, very unique too. I like the idea of unique factions coming into play, and I think that was my biggest fear. When I first got told about Golg Maneater, I was really worried that we were going to see Changeling 2.0. Pleasantly surprised that I was wrong, but the worry was there until they finally showcased it properly. I'm not going to say it's a return to form for Creative Assembly. I think another DLC or 2 will be the judge of that, because we still have to wait, especially with CA Sofia jumping in there. Again, they're a great studio. They do lack in certain things, like for example battles, but I'm not going to jump into this massive celebration when Thrones happened after the Shadows of Change layoffs. Thrones also had its own layoffs, and this is the one straight after. We have to see what happens next, when all the dust has properly settled. I do think Creative Assembly are winning back a lot of good favor, and it's very obvious here. The fanbase seems a lot better, everyone seems a lot more calm. If anything, all the rage that is coming out, if any, is where's the next DLC, when could it happen, and all that type of stuff, which again is awesome. It's good to see everyone kind of just harmonious for a while. It's something that needs to be kept up with. They need to start talking about the next DLC, the one after this one, as fast as possible. That's the way to keep everyone cool and everyone happy. I would argue that the next DLC needs to be a bit more themed. The weirdness here of orcs, ogres, and Khorne, there's no like lore really centered around that, and I think it's a bit disjointed there, but it doesn't hurt the overall product. I'm going with the idea here that yes, it's 3 individualized packs rather than a big theme overall. Whereas Thrones of Decay, for example, it was essentially Tamarkan versus the Empire with the dwarves doing their own thing, even though it was still separated because of the lack of the strong narrative. Omens of Destruction kind of works as a, we've got 3 different packs, we're mashing them together. That's not necessarily a bad thing, it kind of works. I found myself gravitating to all 3 characters in a very similar way, mostly because all of the characters offered something very, very unique compared to their other racial stylings. I'm not opposed to this. I wouldn't say no to a future DLC of, say, let's just throw out some random stuff, Norska, High Elves, and Lizardmen. Completely different factions, and they're very far from each other, but it would actually throw in a fair amount of content, right? If they act independently, it's fine, as long as they have some sort of story baked into them. Doesn't have to be massive story. It's very obvious that the last few DLCs have been losing out on story ever since Shadows of Change, but it just has to have a little bit of a push, like Thrones of Decay, to keep people immersed. The people do read the text. Even those that say that the story isn't that important, they do read it. I don't think this is going to do Throne of Decay numbers, but that's kind of expected. Thrones of Decay had Empire, Dwarfs, and Nurgle. Like, all of them are pretty popular factions, Dwarfs and Empire being the biggest ones. This one's focusing more around destruction and chaos, so it's not really going to be that big of a ticket, but I do think that this is going to do way better than Shadows of Change. I mean, it doesn't really take that much to do better than that, that's for sure. It barely beat the player numbers when it first released. It's important to note that these are my experience, and you guys might think otherwise through maybe other reviews or your own playthroughs when you get your hands on it on the 12th of December. But I've put 100 hours into this title. We had a lot less time than usual, so I've been working like a freaking dog. I'll be very honest with you there, I am a little bit sleep deprived, but I wanted to make sure that I did my regular content output to be able to get enough time. There's way too many game journalists, and even YouTubers too, who will jump onto a game or a DLC or whatever, play it for like an hour or two, and then they go, yeah, that's the review. That's not enough time for a Total War title, or a Total War DLC. There's so much that comes into it, it affects so many different races and factions. These games, at least for me, are not a one and done. I love this setting and I want it to be as good as possible, and you have to take into account that way too much of the game journalists do that whole Cuphead thing. Oh, game too hard, or play it on easy. I'm looking at you, IGN, with playing it on easy. It's good that we got another good DLC for Total War Warhammer. We've essentially had, what, 2 good DLCs in a row now. I am looking towards the future with a little bit more hope, that's for sure. My main thing, like I've said before, Creative Assembly need to be a bit faster with products, and they need to be a bit more transparent with stuff, less drip feeding. The drip feeding just felt a little bit awful. But that's all for today. I think that this DLC will do fairly well. It's only a matter of time. Here's hoping the patch doesn't fuck it over. Have a great day, everyone. If you want us to talk more about it, I'll be live on Twitch. And yeah, other than that, hopefully everything goes well. Have a great day, everyone. I can't wait for release so I can have a little bit of a break.